Excellent. Thanks, everyone. Carla, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Excellent. Welcome, everyone, to the session on Minnesota's official high school equivalency assessments. Here's my boring title slide, but many of you that know me know that I never like boring slides. So my more adventure or my preferred title slide is here. And my preferred title is also here. Let's talk about our new HiSEAs adventures that have begun. And just a quick note, yes, the HiSEAs is a term that I personally have just coined up because it sounds far more interesting than HSE, than trying to list multiple tests or say high school equivalency assessments. HiSEAs just makes it sound a lot better. So I hope that you understand, and you'll see that I'll frequently be using and trying to coin that term HiSEAs as we go forward into the next several years. A little bit about me. My role, my name is Brad Hasskamp. I'm the adult education supervisor or the state adult education director. My pronouns are he, him, his. You can see my email there. As I've said before, I've been at MDE since 2010. I've been the state GED administrator since 2015, roughly. There was kind of as Jim Caldwell retired, it was kind of an awkward transition between Todd Wagner and I, which one of us was going to be the state GED administrator. And for a while, I think both of us were, so. And just an interesting note, I helped launch GED preparation programming. My first real experience with GED and high school equivalency assessments was helping to launch GED prep programming at Neighborhood House back in 2004, 2005, 2006. And like many of you are already getting in the chat, with HiSEAs, there are so many better pictures that you can do. There are so many better pirate puns you can make. It makes it a lot more adventurous. So yep, I'm glad that you're getting into the fun of it. So on today's cruise, FYI for the picture on this slide, I really wanted to have a picture of Gilligan's Island or the SS Minnow, but I couldn't find one that was unlicensed. So instead we get this beautiful fjord picture instead. On today's adventure, we are going to talk about the Minnesota competition for HiSEAs, the results and next steps. We're also going to talk about the test subsidy, and we're going to start talking about that new advisory group that's forming this fall. And we'll have plenty of time for your questions and your input. And in fact, this session is meant to be a little bit more conversational. So as you have questions, feel free to click to raise your hand, and I'll be happy to, and you can unmute yourself and we can talk through your question along the way. We don't need to be very formal. And honestly, I don't have a lot of slides for this session either, because I would like to make sure that we address your questions and get thoughts from you. So let's start with part one of our voyage, and that's the Minnesota HiSEAs competition. And some of you might see this, some of you maybe are less interested in knowing all of the details, but the competition timeline has been exhausting, and it has not gone according to my initial plan. I'll just flat out admit that. The Minnesota State Legislature passed a law that struck GED from all state statute and replaced it with an approved high school, a state-approved high school equivalency assessment. And when that happened, that basically triggered the process where we needed to go through a competition to decide which test or which tests would be approved in the state of Minnesota for high school equivalency purposes. Right after that legislation passed at the end of May 2017, we went into a leadership planning, and I had to get approval from the commissioner on how we were going to go forward. And so that process took a couple of months. Once we did that, we formed an adult education stakeholder group to really guide and provide feedback on what that competition should look like. What should be the criteria in evaluating assessments? And so that group met for 1 year, a couple of times in person. And thank you to everyone that was part of that stakeholder group. Originally, we were going to limit it to like about 9 individuals, but we had 16 or 17 apply, and we allowed all 17 to join the group. After that year with the stakeholder group, Todd Wagner and I met with administration and the Department of Corrections to really start hammering out what the application materials would look like. And I will tell you, we went through multiple people at the Department of Administration, and honestly, there were a couple, like George Kimball was still working at DOC when this started, and then he retired. And so we went through a couple people at DOC too. And so we had some delays in this application materials development, largely because of the staffing turnover in administration. And ultimately, though, we had Kaylee Stevens, who really helped guide this process. And I'm so glad that we were able to get Kaylee's help. Kaylee has been outstanding with this work. But honestly, that application development took 2 solid years of work on our part. And then in 2020, we finally were able to post this application. And that was posted for a couple of months. And then there was the evaluation process. And what surprised me is we thought, well, maybe the evaluators would need maybe a month or a couple of months. The evaluators actually 6 months to a year to evaluate the applications because they were so in depth. It was a very long application. The applications that were submitted, it took a lot of time to read through all of the material and do the appropriate evaluation. So that process took a little bit longer to evaluate, and we were happy to give the evaluators sufficient time. The evaluation team consisted of staff from the Minnesota Department of Education, the Minnesota Department of Corrections, tribal nation representation, and adult education program representation. So we had a good array of representation and a great team of evaluators in that process. And I'm very thankful for all of the evaluators that participated. Finally, then in 2021, this spring, we were able to make a decision on the applications on which vendor or vendors to pursue a contract with. The contract was then developed in May, and then there were negotiations that took place with that contract and with the vendor or vendors. And then the vendors can sign the contract. And to date, we have had one vendor sign the contract. Or sign a contract with the state of Minnesota, and that was GED testing service. So we are excited to say that GED will continue to be one of our approved assessments in the state of Minnesota for at least for the next 8 years at least. And so that is really exciting that contract is signed and that we have this process done. Originally, the contracts were only going to be for 5 years. But Lindsay, like you said, wait, we started this process 4 years ago? Yes, we did start it 4 years ago. And because this contract and this application process was so complicated, it was unlike anything that administration has ever done a competition for before, they said. Because it was such a complicated process, they extended the contracts out so that they can be renewed for a total of 8 years instead of 5 years. Which, yay, means that we don't have to complete this process again until July of 2029. So that is really exciting to see. And I will say that there is still another contract that is being negotiated with another test vendor. Unfortunately, I cannot give you any details about that process or any details of even who that vendor is. So, and we will not know if they will officially be approved or if they will have a signed contract until the contract is actually fully negotiated and signed. And right now that process is specifically between the Department of Administration and the vendor. So I do not have any more specific details that I can give you about that process. So that's where we are with the contracting process. Are there any questions at this point about the process or the contract? Feel free to unmute yourself, or you can chat in if you have any questions.
Hey, Brad, it's Andy.
Hey, Andy.
if we get the second contract all figured out and it becomes a second test, will all programs be expected to offer both tests, or can a program choose one or the other?
Excellent question. So no individual adult education program, no individual testing center is required to offer every test, every approved test. So each test center, each adult education program would be able to choose if they offer one of those tests and which tests or tests they would like to offer. So maybe a program would like to offer both. Maybe a program can't afford to offer either as a testing center. Or maybe you choose just to do one or the other. That is absolutely within the program's choice.
Okay, follow up on the testing that we've been doing with GED testing. We get a certain amount back for proctoring a test at our testing location. Will that change with this new contract?
Wait, do you mind repeating that question, Andy?
So like when we offer a test at our testing center, our testing center gets a certain amount back for the cost of proctoring that test. And it's been, in my view, fairly low, a fairly small amount. Did that amount that a testing center will get paid for proctoring a test change with this new contract that we have with GED Testing Service?
Yep. So GED Service said that they would continue to pay that $10 per test, that standard fee that they offer. And by the way, Melissa Hultstrand, our state relationship manager with GED Testing Service, is joining us. So Melissa, please jump in at any time, especially if I say something wrong. But as part of the contract, GED will continue to pay the same amount that they've been paying. We didn't have authorization. The Department of Administration did not say, it said that we did not have authorization to require a certain payment for a testing center to offer the test, but we did put it as part of the budget. And we did, any vendors that inquired with us, we said, well, you need to make sure that it's financially, that you have a financial incentive for the test center to offer the test. So when the contract with the second test vendor is established, we'll be able to know at that point what the amount of the I don't know if you want to call it the payment to the testing center, or that kickback, some have called it, is. So that will be, it's really up to each vendor to set that amount. Did that clarify your questions, Andy?
Yes, it did. And just a heads up for everybody, Melissa and Chris Blaisdell will be doing a session right after this. They wants GD input.
Absolutely. Yes. And I encourage, if you have specific questions with GED that don't get answered during this session, in particular, to join their next session, their session next. Excellent. So any other questions about the contracting timeline or the competition process? Okay. Not hearing any. Don't worry, you'll have chance. There'll be plenty more chances to chime in. So I just want to share a little bit of our next steps here. So one of our next steps is to determine if or when a contract with a second test vendor can be signed. No work with that vendor can start until there is a signed contract. And if the vendor and the state of Minnesota cannot come up with a contract that they can agree with, we will just have GED as our approved assessment and stay as a GED state. And then if a second contract is signed, we'll need to start the communication process. So I've already started working with our communications department here at the Minnesota Department of Education just to plan the final announcements once this whole process is actually fully over, to make sure that we're able to communicate which the tests that have been approved in the state of Minnesota, and think of all the stakeholders that we want to reach out with that information. Then if there is a new test vendor that is approved, we'll need to work with that test vendor over the next 6 months to a year to implement a new high school equivalency assessment system. It really will be up to the vendor to lead that process, but we'll need to be involved for consultation purposes, very similar to how we work with GED testing service. setting up those test centers. We'll need to create some policies on our end. There'll need to be policies on their on the test vendor side. There'll need to be training and lots of communication about the process and what that will look like. And another big process is we need to allocate, if there's a second test contract that's signed, we need to set up a contract with IT, and we need to allocate anywhere like maybe another $10,000 to $50,000 to set up so that we can actually credential people that pass that test. So we'll have to do some additions to our MDE credentialing database to process the data from a second test vendor, and we have to pay for that work. And unfortunately, though, there's no funding that's been allocated for this, so we have to pull it from our federal adult education funding in order to pay for this process. Any questions about next steps with the contracting? Okay, going forward, let's go into part 2 of our discussion today. And part 2 is really about the subsidy. So the subsidy is available for GED testing right now. The new subsidy is $10 off per GED test in each subject, and a max of $40 discount per tester. That is a decrease from what we've had for the last couple of years, which was paying for a free full battery or $120 per tester. Unfortunately, and also the total allocation went down from $245,000 last year and the year before. Each year that was what was allocated. Now the legislature has allocated $125,000 for the subsidy. So it decreased from what we've had in past years, and they decided not to make that increase or pay for, the legislature did decide not to make a free first battery per tester permanent, unfortunately. And many of you hopefully already know this, but how can you access how can someone access that subsidy? With MNGED 10, you can access it by, any tester can access it by using that promo code when they schedule and pay for their test. But there are other criteria that they have to make sure that they meet. They have to select Minnesota as their testing location. They need to live in Minnesota and have a Minnesota mailing address. They need to schedule testing at a non-corrections testing center in Minnesota and be approved in one of the approved or be a test center that's approved in a border community. Like we had in the past, we had Sioux Falls, Fargo, some places in North and South Dakota were approved as testing centers because that was the closest testing center for some individuals. So they can use it at those test centers as well. And this test needs to be scheduled between July of this year and June of next year. And then it should be renewed again for starting July 1, 2022, depending on what the legislature allocates for the subsidy. And just note though, if the student does not pass, or if they don't show up for testing when they use that subsidy code, they will not receive the subsidy for the retake. They will have to pay for the retake and pay the standard retake test fee. Another special note about the subsidy, because I got a couple angry emails my direction when I released the information about the new subsidy, and people are saying, please, Brad, you at the Department of Education need to change your mind. Don't cut the subsidy on our students. Our students need this subsidy. I just want to be very clear that the subsidy, the amount, and the details of the subsidy are not set by the Minnesota Department of Education. They are passed by the Minnesota State Legislature. The Minnesota State Legislature, the House and the Senate, they write and pass the bills that establish the HiSEAs test subsidy, and they allocate the funding for it. So we are just implementing the law that they write. I just want to make that very clear and know that it wasn't us that said we wanted or anything like that. It was a decision at the Minnesota State Legislature. Are there any questions about the subsidy and the MNGED GED 10 code? Okay, not seeing any questions. We can move on to the next chunk. And this is our third chunk for today. And that's our high school equivalency assessment advisory group that we are forming. FYI, I love this picture. It looks so peaceful. I don't know where that is, but I kind of want to be there right now. Anyway, so let's talk about this advisory group. So honestly, forming an advisory group about our high school equivalency assessments has been something I've been wanting to do for a couple of years now, but I just honestly have not had the time or the resources to really get it established. So we have built this into Literacy Action Network's supplemental service grant. And we are excited to kind of work with Literacy Action Network and create this HiSEAs advisory group sometime during this fall. And yes, like you said, Andy, this doesn't look like a peaceful picture, but that's because, and I picked this picture in particular because sometimes, especially if there's a second test that's approved, it can feel a little tumultuous. It can feel like, wait, how do we clarify this? How can we kind of move forward? And so this advisory group will really help create some clear policies, clear communication, advise the Department of Education on how to move forward so that we can make sure that the public and our key stakeholders have the information they need and make us go from this process where it seems a little more chaotic to a calmer scene like this. So that is why we're hoping, that's what we're hoping this new advisory group can help us do. This advisory group will meet monthly. And it will be purely a virtual group. We will not meet in person. And each session will be about 1 hour to 90 minutes. However, there might be some additional time for the first session or the first month or so to do some training and to kind of get the group started, formed, and normed. And then there will be stipends available for advisory group members. And we will have Literacy Action Network and the Minnesota Department of Education will communicate the application process and announce that via email. So stay tuned, check your emails. This will not be yet this month. It'll be September or October that you'll be able to see more about that. And the purpose, like I mentioned, of this advisory group is to address policy questions. What are some quirky things that are happening that we need to try to make sure we address? Let's develop some responses, some clear guidance to technical assistance issues, or let's develop some technical assistance resources that programs and testing centers can use to help them. And let's identify some training needs, some professional development needs, and let's implement some new professional development and training with the test vendor or test vendors. And I'm sure the advisory group will think of other things that we need to do along the way. It'll be really kind of our key go-to group for helping us address high school equivalency testing issues. So that is the purpose of that advisory group. If you are interested, which I hope there are some people that are on this session, in this group, in this session that are interested, look for that email. You can email me, but unfortunately that won't do anything. Just look for that email with the application and submit that application as soon as possible. And Andy, so that first picture was not so peaceful. This is what it will look like once we have that group formed. That's what I'd like to say. Unfortunately, we are a virtual group. We will not be making any trips to Hawaii as an advisory group. So I apologize if you're hoping to get to Hawaii by being part of this group, but we'll still have a great time. And it will be, I'm really looking forward to having a group that we can use as a go-to for our high school equivalency efforts. Are there any questions right now about the advisory group? I guess I'd just like to know right now, if anyone here is thinking about being part of the advisory group. Just do a thumbs up reaction, or you can just let me know in the chat if you're interested or thinking about applying. Excellent. Seeing Andy's interested, Sherry, excellent. Tammy, Laura, Arlene, Sean, excellent. Okay, good. I hope many of you are excited. You know, Rob, we can, I don't know if Literacy Action Network put any pirate costumes in their budget, but we can talk with them and see. Excellent, Karen. And as far as this advisory group, I will just say that that some of the representation that we want on this advisory group, we will want, we'll have a representative from the Minnesota Department of Education. We will have a representative from each of any approved test vendor. So Melissa, I hope that you're willing to be part of this advisory group. Are you?
Yes, definitely, Brad.
Excellent. And then we want to make sure that we have representation from a variety of adult education programs. We will want a representative from the Minnesota Department of Education, or I'm sorry, Minnesota Department of Corrections. We'll want to make sure that we have Twin Cities, Greater Minnesota representation, big, medium, and small size program representation. And we'll want to have some testing center representation as well. The group size, we have, I honestly don't remember what the group size will be. I can't remember if we said maybe a 9-person group, or I think 9 was what we had envisioned, but I could be wrong on that. And we might be negotiating that as well. We're working with Literacy Action Network starting next week to try to figure out some more of the details. And I'm glad that you brought this up as well, Angie. We want to also make sure that we have people in a wide variety of roles. We don't just want managers. We don't just want teachers. We want to make sure that we have teacher representation, administrator representation, and representation. So a variety of roles in this advisory group as well. Excellent question. Any other questions about the advisory group? Oh, Jean, excellent question. Can I give some of the reasons for pursuing another high school equivalency test? Let's see how I can answer this question well. So when the state legislature struck GED from our state statute and said, based on an approved high school equivalency assessment or assessments, opened the door to requiring us to do a competition to decide which high school equivalency test or which high school equivalency assessments would be approved in the state of Minnesota. As we worked with the Minnesota Department of Administration, they said that based on the statute and the way that the statute was written, we did not have the ability to say that we could only be a single test state, that we had to approve potentially multiple tests if multiple tests scored high enough, and if multiple vendors' applications scored high enough. And so as we went through the application process and the scoring process, there were two test vendors that had fairly similar scores, and we made the decision that it did not seem fair to just be a single test state when both test applications were fairly high and had fairly similar scores, well above what we thought would be the threshold for acceptable. And for that reason, we pursued contracts with multiple test vendors. I will say from my personal perspective that, being a multi-test state, if that is what we become, there are a lot of complications there with that process. Like, students that are taking the test need to understand that there are multiple options, and they need to make sure that they don't, let's say they started with one test, they can't all of a sudden sign up for a separate test from a different vendor. They actually need to stick through with that one test and that same vendor. And so that, I think that could be a little confusing. It's honestly also just a little bit more costly on our end because we need to come up with money to reboot or revamp our Department of Education credentialing system to add any additional tests. But it was what was fair and it was what was legal. And that is why we did that. It seemed that according to the interpretation of state statute, we wanted to make sure we did the process well, and that we were fair, and that we were adhering to the intent of the law. And so that is why we are at this point right now. Jean, does that answer your question? Or did you have any other questions about that or any clarifying questions? Okay, sounds like that answered the question. And then Clarice says, agreed, but I've never liked how our high school equivalency option was a for-profit company. This is contrary to public education. So it's a good point, and that was actually one issue that was discussed in part through the competition process of the national test vendors that are available for high school equivalency purposes. 2 of the 3 are private companies, and then one is a nonprofit, and then the third is a nonprofit company. It's one of those situations that I understand that can be problematic for some folks. At the same time, though, the company or the entity that offers the test was not as important, according to our stakeholder group, as the quality of the test, the recognition of the test, the reputation the test has with other stakeholders. The quality of the test and the reputation among stakeholders was by far more important, according to our stakeholder group, which I agree with, than whether the company was for-profit or nonprofit. We wanted to make sure that we prioritized evaluating the quality of the test over who was issuing the test, as long as the entity was a legal entity, of course. But yeah, but it is one of those quirky issues within adult education or public education that I know is really touchy for a lot of our folks in Minnesota. And Clarice, I don't know if you want to say anything more about that. I'm definitely open to additional thoughts. Okay. Any other questions right now about the advisory group? Okay, not seeing any. So let's go into kind of our next subject, which is really to get some additional questions, but to share some ideas and to obtain some feedback from all of you. So here are some current plans looking ahead from the Minnesota Department of Education. One, we are starting the process to hire a new high school equivalency specialist for our team at the Minnesota Department of Education. That would be basically a position that would replace my old position before I stepped into the supervisor role. It'll be slightly adapted and prioritizing high school equivalency specialist, as well as some accountability specialist work. So that'll be that role. Hopefully some of you maybe that are listening or some of you out in the field will be interested and will apply for this position when it's posted. We're hoping that position will be posted sometime calendar year. Then we also will be starting a process once we complete the contracting process with test vendors. We will be starting an application and approval a competition for a credentialing vendor, so that anyone who needs an instant high school equivalency assessment, like a diploma, like they need their GED transcript or anything like that, we are going to be posting a competition and an application to be a credentialing vendor for the state of Minnesota. What we found over the last 10 years in particular, and it's gotten worse over the last couple of years, we are getting hundreds of requests per week. Alice Smith is our GED records specialist. The amount of work that she is getting now versus what she was getting just a couple of years ago has skyrocketed. Employers are demanding more verifications, are expecting to see more verifications. Colleges are needing verifications. More entities are needing verifications that did not expect verifications in the past. And many of those people asking for verifications want it instantly. They want it now. They're not willing to wait a week. They're not willing to wait even a couple of hours in some cases. And so this has been really stressful. And many of you know, Sarah, you are right. Alice, amazing. Alice has been doing this work, has been a very big advocate for all of our GED graduates. And she is an amazing individual, and she works so hard for our system, and she has such a time-intensive, stressful position. And our goal is to decrease that stress. Alice has gone through the ringer, especially in the past year, just with this, with the amount of verification requests and transcript requests and diploma requests that have been coming up. It has been overwhelming. And I mean, like I said, hundreds of requests per week. And we need to fix that. We need to put some relief on Alice on that position. And so that's why we're going to be contracting with a credentialing vendor to really take a lot of, anyone that wants an instant credential, they can go through that credentialing vendor and they can get it instantly. They're going to have to pay for it, but they can get it instantly. What Alice's position will do in the future will just be mailing out records, and it'll be like a 1 week turnaround and go out via US mail, and no walk-ins. Anyone that's willing to wait that time and there's not a time pressure, they can go through that free process through us. Anyone that wants anything more quickly, wants it electronically, they'll have to go through the paid credentialing vendor process. And Julie, yep, you're right. Alice is retiring here soon. And it's really stressful thinking about Alice retiring. She has more experience on our team with the Department of Education. She's been working with state government since 1980. She's been working with our system, working in public service for more than 41 years at this point. And she is an outstanding individual. She has been just a relentless public advocate and a public servant. And we are so excited that she is getting the chance to retire here soon. So, and we want to make sure that we try to put release the pressure valve a little bit and try to make our work, try to build capacity and try to still meet our stakeholders, our graduates' needs. Third, we also then will need to, and this is going to probably be a little bit more on Jody's plate, we'll need to determine if we have any new approved high school equivalency assessments, how will that work with a standard adult diploma? And how can that be embedded in those completion options? So that will be kind of another current plan looking ahead. So that's a lot of what I had to share with you. What are some of the questions, some of the ideas, some of the feedback that you have for the Department of Education and our work going ahead? Feel free to unmute yourself, chat in any ideas. What are some questions, ideas, and or feedback that you have for us? While you're thinking about that, give you a chance to think. Melissa Holtstrand, is there anything that I'm missing that you'd want to share?
Hey, Brad. I mean, just GED, we have a lot of updates that we're going to be making. And I know Chris's session, my colleague will be delivering the session on OP and providing updates on that as we move to post-pilot on September 1st. And I think that most of her session will be taken up just speaking strictly on OP. But I wanted to let the group that's on here know about a few things if we have time for that. I don't see any other questions right now, but if there are, just stop me. Duplicate accounts continue to be an issue. And so we are putting together criteria that we will review with Brad to take a look at accounts that are owned by the same person. And then per Brad's approval, then we will work on merging those accounts so that we don't have so many duplicate accounts in the system. Also, and so that's going to be later this fall. The accommodations question that students, when they create the account, that they see asking if they want accommodations, that's typically the last question in the first set of questions that they have to answer when creating an account. We are actually going to remove that and a few other questions, but for anybody that wants to look at testing with accommodations, all they'll have to do going forward is go to the edit profile section of their account, which is always in the top right-hand corner. And then they can make that selection there, indicate that they would like to test with accommodations. We have, Chris might be able to speak a little bit more about this with the next session, but GED Ready Direct, for those of you that are purchasing and assigning vouchers through GED Manager, bulk tiered pricing will be introduced very shortly here. New vouchers, OP vouchers, will be available on Marketplace as well as the voucher store. And I do want to remind those of you who have vouchers to take a look at them, see when they expire. Just send me an email with them if they're going to be expiring in the next few months so we can extend those for you. And obviously, if there were any unused ones that were expired, so please send me an email and we'll get those renewed for you. But just know that it does take time. If you can get them to me before they expire, that would be ideal. And also along the line of vouchers, please keep in mind that any vouchers that you have on hand will work on the OP test post pilot. So post September 1st, even though the cost is going up, if you have vouchers, your students can use those and apply that to the OP test up until December 1st. So I think that's really important. So if you have those, give them to your students. That way, less is being spent on the OP test until December 1st. We are also looking for student volunteers to provide us with feedback on the sign up process, as well as the dashboard, what the account looks like, how easy it is for them to interact. So if you have any students that you think would be willing to speak to us virtually, participate in that, and giving us feedback, please send me an email with their name, their email address, and our teams will reach out to them. So just like how we reached out to many students across the US to provide us with feedback on the score report, we're looking for many student volunteers to provide us with feedback on creating a GED account as well as the dashboard. So that's what comes to mind right now. More GED Manager updates as well. The search button will appear in all parts of GED Manager by end of year. So that way, as soon as you start entering any information into any of the search fields, before it would start to populate, showing you accounts that matched what you would enter. Now you will have to click the search button after you enter your search criteria. And GED Works, more employers are paying for their employees to have access to practice materials, GED Ready tests, GED advisors, operational tests. That list includes Taco Bell, KFC, Cheesecake Factory, Total Wine, Chili's, Pizza Hut. If you have any students working at those companies, please let them know that the company that they're working for will actually pay for all of those things. So that's huge, and we will have more Minnesota companies on board in the next 6 months. That's what I can think of off the top of my head.
Excellent. Thanks, Melissa. I really appreciate that. Some of a quick rundown of some of the really important updates happening with GED. Thank you.
No problem.
And also gave folks a chance to think if they had any questions. Are there any questions? Feel free just to unmute yourself. And if you have any questions for me about the high school equivalency process, if you have any questions specific to GED, Melissa can answer them while we're here, but we just have a minute or two left. Yeah, like you said, Laura, lots of news. There's lots. Thank you, Clarice. I really appreciate that. Any other questions? If not, I think we can stop the recording. And I just thank you all for your time. Thank you all for participating today. And this is my